Chapter 31 Dreaming Still. Lord Chanticleer set a remorseless pace for the journey north. He himself took a grim position in Black Pale's antlers, riding the high bounds without a word. As fast as the stag could travel, so fast did Chanticleer wish to go. One thing alone was left for him to do, and how he was constrained till it was done. Animals travelled in his train like the tail of a comet. Other deer, goats, the hasty hare and pronghorn, sheep, cats on their own recognizance, wolves in the wings. The fire in him had burned them too. But inspiration isn't capability, and some of them fell back, too tired to continue. Pertinac's cob got as far as Chalcedony's Valley of Cicadas, where he collapsed, panting. He dragged himself to the side, while hooves and paws pounded past, and he thought, "Well, I can't go back again. What would Mrs. Cobb think of me if I did?" He thought, "I'll wait here. I'll wait till they return." The hardier animals kept pace. A band of creatures wound through the woods, broke open the frozen grasslands, bowed their heads before a bitter wind, fell silent, save for the rhythm of their running, under a low, forbidding sky, slept dead and close to one another in the night, but rose in the dim morning, rose to their aching legs, rose again and followed the blazing rooster, and ran. It was because they chose to follow that he led, not because he chose to lead them. Their hearts were on him, but his was on the thing ahead. Chanticleer. He was oblivious of the hardship they endured. He raced to his baptism. They merely ran. But they believed on him, so they ran. Animals galloped behind him. There was only one who went before, yet this one had the rooster's attention, because he had a map in his head, and he was the key. A coyote, utterly terrified by the trek and its intensity. Sometimes the strange coyote would fall down. He would twist around and bite his own shin, and this was no soft bite. He'd break flesh and draw blood. Then Chanticleer would talk and talk to him in a low voice, and the coyote would get up again to a nervous trot, but his tail was ever between his legs. One noon, the beast doubled over and vomited all the food he'd eaten at the hemlock. It lay steaming on the ground, and the coyote seemed to regard it with immeasurable sadness. Then Chanticleer, since talking availed nothing, touched the point of the slasher to his buttock, mounted the coyote himself, and rode him for a while, beating his wings for speed. After that, the coyote withdrew into a daze and took them straight to their destination without another lapse. Chanticleer wore his weapons. Again and again, unconsciously, he felt the heft of the gaff and the slasher, bound tightly at his spurs. He was feeling his readiness. He was feeling the skill in him and the fight to come, the strength of his cause and its certainty. Nothing prevented him any more but the getting there. He breathed through his nostrils. His beak was a nail in this outrageous winter. His eye was lidded and hard. He took the black stag's bucking leaps without a word, but his heart was screaming, "I am going to kill you, worm!" Ferric, that skinny coyote, Ferric simply couldn't comprehend the thing that he was doing. All he could think was that the consequences would be terrible. He had gone to get food, and he was bringing back instead a host of thundering beasts. Run he never so fast, they were always right behind him, closing in with all their weight and all their teeth on the little den that held his wife and children, who hadn't a hint of what was coming. Rachel! He thought of Rachel's smile and Rachel's confidence in him. Benoni, too. Benoni, wondering why his papa was so weak, so craven and so scared. For Benoni he would be mighty. For Rachel he wanted to be a calm provider, but what was he doing? Why he, Ferric, he was bringing the doom upon their heads. He, none other. So when Rachel appeared in the air before him, whispering, "This is the truth, mighty among all of the creatures," When that woman smiled, Ferric fell down in an agony of self-loathing, and he took his own leg between his teeth and he bit it to the bone. Who else was there to punish? No one. Himself. But the rooster would murmur with fire in his eye, "Jug, jug," and all his images would fade. There was only the driving rooster and himself. "Bring me to her who cries, 'Jug, jug,' and I will set you free." The rooster would promise this, and Ferric would feel the lure of that freedom. "Till then the world depends on you. The peace of the universe rests with you. Go, go, go!" Once, astounded by his own bravado, the coyote had lied. He took the whole procession in the wrong direction for 3 full hours, making a slow turn to the right, enough to angle them away from his pitiful family. He planned to take them nowhere, and then they could kill him if they wished. But suddenly there came a dreadful whistle from the sky, the shriek of accusation, and down from the heavens dropped a hawk, stooping at a wild speed. He landed. He revealed our divergence from true north, and Ferric Coyote threw up. He vomited every precious bit of food reserved for his family. Neither could he swallow it again. He could only stare at the loss in sadness, because now he had nothing for the children that he loved, and the very reason for his going was gone. After that he lost himself as well. Motion became automatic, merely. A sting in his buttock made him move. The rooster clutching at his shoulders judged him, and instinct took him home. He didn't want to think. Chanticleer is dreaming. Curiously, he's glad that the dream has returned, proof of the expedition. With all his heart, with all his soul and might, he is crying aloud, "I am coming!" But there is a difference in this dream, and it rather distresses him, since everything should remain the same, and nothing change to trouble his purposes. He can see. Far, far away, walking on some celestial sphere, as though she is walking in the valleys of the moon, Chanticleer sees the dun cow, one horn at her head, one horn gone. Oh, she is so distant. He could use her nearness now. "Are you," he wants to call, "are you the woman of sorrows after all?" But he doesn't call anything like that, because he can't see her face, because she is walking yet farther away from him, as though refusing to acknowledge him, and he is hurt by the coldness of the gesture, and because in this dream, in this sublunar sphere, he's calling something else. "I am coming!" roar his throat and mouth. "I am coming!" "Almost," he cries to the dun cow, his perfect explanation. "It is my destiny, my worth, my goodness. I can't do otherwise." But suddenly, the dream is strangled by a single word from Worm, arising like the fog. "Come." And Chanticleer wakes. Chapter 32. The Canyon Low Derg. John Wesley's eyes popped open, awake, alert to a sound. Clop. The woman coyote woke second, raised her head. The pups snored. John Wesley stood up. "Wait," said the woman. "Coyotes do freeze. Weasels break cover and fight. There was light outside." Clop. So, an uncertain hoof at the rim of the canyon, someone finding footing. Then there were a number of hooves clattering, and several someones descending the steep fall of stone. So, a figure passed. The woman drew breath sharply. "Ferric!" Wooden coyote, thought John Wesley. He'd glimpsed a thin beast grinning meaninglessly, skulking downstream with his tail between his legs. Is Ferric? Poor Ferric. Poor little Benoni. Immediately the legs of an enormous stag crossed the weasel's vision, and other legs in forest. These too were familiar. John stuck his head outside and was struck dumb. A weasel speechless, so shocked by the sight that he truly could not catch his breath. It was his rooster! It was his rooster riding that elegant stag in the exact same canyon where John was. But how could this be? It was his rooster! Look at his rooster! By God! Look at him! Why, he was glorious now. He was huge and proud and golden and grim as a lord should be. His comb stood up like a castle wall. Oh, look at that mighty comb! And his beak, it gleamed like jet. And his nails flashed whiter than the lily, and he had weapons on. It was his rooster, by God, the same Lord somebody Chanticleer that he remembered from the first bright days of vigor, conviction, and we can do anything's, that rooster, him, come back again. Rooster, rooster. Poor John couldn't get his mouth to work. Rooster. He couldn't declare the marvel that they should bump into one another in a northern canyon, and the black stag was galloping downstream. For one horrible instant the weasel feared that this wonder was all a dream. It was too perfect. But then imperfection happily kicked him in the butt, and he knew it was reality. The deer behind Black Pale struck and nearly crushed John Wesley. The goats, the sheep, the swirling hooves of beasts. He fumbled back into the den, and this is how glad he was for the reality. He didn't hold this beating against a single soul. No, he came up grinning, forgiving them all. "Mama Coyote!" he coughed. He laughed, he gestured outside and downstream. "Is my rooster! My rooster come back again!" Neither could Rachel speak. She stood pressed against the back wall, all of her children beneath her, a staring terror in her eye. Benoni said, "Mama?" The plain brown bird leaped frantically, branch to branch in her thorn bush. Her body switched and fluttered. Her claws snatched and released 3 twigs in a second, but her head held steady, because she was watching an impossible arrival. Down the gorge, splashing and stamping behind a crouching coyote, a herd, toward her directly, and without a pause, as though she were the destination. But how could that be? A herd of beasts? Strangers? And in the front walked a coal-black deer, and in his antlers trembled a flame. The bird couldn't control herself. She could not hold still. She thrashed around the bush as though flying on a tether, though she couldn't fly. In fact, she was piercing her flesh by the broken points of wing bone, and bleeding. This was such an enormity, suddenly to be watched by so many eyes. The beasts halted some space from her. What? She watched them back. The fire on the deer spread its wings and sailed down to the ground in an easy circle. It was a rooster. It was a rooster of vast dignity and strength and a penetrating eye. He moved toward her, he alone. His eye fixed her like a charm, and she stilled. He yearned to know something. What? He came unhurried. She was his total attention. Oh, he draped her altogether with his looking, and it was not cruel. It wanted to be familiar. Do I know you? He tilted his head to the side in a motion of perfect pity, and even her heart went quiet to see that. Do I know you? The rooster paused at the bush, his warm eye level with her own. "Woman," he said aloud, "are you sad?" What a question! Sad? Self-consciousness burned her from the throat to the breast, and she fluttered, and sadness did, in fact, overwhelm her. A sadness that rose from this moment and the loneliness of such an audience, embarrassment. A sadness that reached backward through her isolated life in this place, to the memory of the obscenity that kept her here, guarding a hole, the stain that stained her. Sad? What right had a stranger to such a question? Do I know you? She never intended to be sad in public. Sad. She cried out at the rooster. She cried, "Jug!" "What?" he said. "Jug!" she cried, hopping in the bush again, angry that he could so quickly draw her out, he and his sympathetic eye. She told him to leave her alone, but she had no tongue. Therefore, "Jug!" is the only sound she made. Jug, jug! Jug, jug! Jug, jug! Instantly the rooster was transfigured, and the brown bird silenced. He swelled like a thunderhead in heaven, startled with lightning, and he began to rumble. Oh no, I don't know you. He was magnificent, he was frightening. Coyote, you are free, he crowed. Go! But the tone of that crow only drove the coyote into a heap against the farther wall and ice. Woman, he crowed to the bird, there is no need for your loneliness. Look, I have brought you brothers and sisters and cousins and friends. He meant it. The bird perceived that he truly meant to abolish her loneliness, but the gesture was too grand, and she was only diminished. You, crowed the rooster to the herd that stood wall to wall in the canyon. Oh, you whom I love, farewell! You are a holy nation, truly. Believe that. And we have suffered our troubles together, and you have been so dear to me, so dear that I cannot say it. But I go now to redeem those troubles forever. You will do well. You will do so well without me. Some of the sheep looked stunned by those words, and their soft faces melted in sorrow. I ask only 2 favors in remembrance. When the winter is over, and the times are sweet and green again, please give a thought to me, and know that I caused that for you. I will be in the grass, my own breath will be the spring breezes, and this, tell Pertolote that I love her. Farewell, crowed the rooster, a ringing crow, and then more softly, farewell. This glorious rooster turned, then, and walked in water to the side of the bush and behind it. He stood a moment in the shadow of the portal, the hole that sank so deep into the earth. And the brown bird realized what he was about to do. He was going down there. No, she wailed. I'm sorry I yelled at you. No, she wailed. But what she said was, Jug! He took a step toward the darkness. She leaped from the bush to his back. Oh, you don't know the evil that waits for you down there. But what, in wild frustration, she said was, Jug, Jug! He shrugged her off. She sprang to his back again, and this time she drove her beak against his skull, puncturing flesh. He didn't fight or hurt her, neither did he stop. He bowed and plucked her from his feathers with an iron claw, and laid her on the ground, and was gone, swallowed by the earth. With all her heart the woman calls to him, in dread for him and desolated because he will not answer, but she should have prevented him, because she is one who knows the evil. Woman, she thinks she hears his distant voice, what else do you want me to do for you? Come back, she wails, but she is hopeless, for all she can cry is, Teru! Chapter 33. And down. Light-headed and frightened at once, Lord Chanticleer felt his way along the pitch-black, twisting corridor. He followed a falling water. He did not stumble, since all of his senses were tuned and acute. He was ready now, and he went without a doubt. This was his dream awoken. This was the real. Worm was below. God, give me strength! He held one secret in his heart, which released him unto this endeavor, and lent him a limitless power, that he was willing to die. Nay, death itself would be his victory. Then what could Worm do to him? Evil had lost its threat, and he was free. I am coming to kill you, Worm! Down, down, feelingly down. In the utter depths, then, where the walls had widened into a massive yawn, and the roof was vaulted monstrously high, and the air was fetid, down in a cathedral of silence, where his claw had found the stone substratum, Chanticleer the rooster had come. Gaff struck stone and made a spark, red and dying. Night in this place was perpetual. Worm's lair. It stank of worm. One violent shiver passed over the rooster, the last in his life, for this one was anticipation of his final offering. Then that was all. He prepared. He raked the darkness with sightless eyes. He drooped his wings. He arched his back. He sucked the loathsome air into his lungs, and he, with all his being, with all his long-collected hatreds, his vengeance, crowed, "Worm!" He echoed the earth tunnels with that challenge and shocked the ancient silences. It was a living voice he issued. "Worm!" "Ah," said the air, "finally." Chanticleer raised the slasher, trembling with readiness. A light appeared above him. He whirled and stared at it. It was thin as thread and green. Soon another hung beside it, and another, and each was writhing as though it were alive, but none was longer than an inch or two, and all of them glimmered mid-distance in the darkness. The glowing spread. Chanticleer watched it spread like a rash, slowly, but he would be as patient as eternity. Yet his body screamed with the thing to come. "Sing," said the air. The light itself dimmed and said, "What shall we sing?" "Of death," said the air, like pressure around him. "Death, already dead." "Worm!" cried Chanticleer. "Show yourself!" A million tendril lights lit up, and all the little lights were taking shape. They formed a titanic head with a mouth as wide as a chancel locked open on a huge sardonic laugh. "Worm!" Behind that head there lay a winding body, serpentine, like the vein of the planet that runs 1,000 miles through Mantle Rock, and all of the light was pulsing. "Worm!" Chanticleer thrust his wings wide to either side of him. He set his mind now, and he rushed for speed, and he took to the air. He soared upward in the chamber, higher and higher, until he curved near the ceiling, 5 times higher than that head, and the carcass lay below him like a river. Chanticleer sailed to a precise zenith. This was it. "Now!" he shrieked. "My life! My vindication!" And he dropped. Like the falcon with his wings laid back, his claws against his chest, and the gaff and the slasher turned to a lethal strike, Chanticleer shot his body the bullet, down to Worm. He would drive through the skull. He would pierce the skull and die in the monster's brain. But he didn't. It was a marsh of rot that he plunged into. It was an oily, putrefying meat. Chanticleer took the concussion, spun an instant, then leaped up on Worm and fought. He stabbed and riddled the skin. He scored it with brilliant speed, deep, digging to bone before the monster returned attack, like digging in mushroom, but none of it mattered. The corpse didn't move. It didn't bleed. It didn't cry out. It didn't react. It didn't fight back. Though Chanticleer assaulted it with a devastating skill, it lay inert. It was dead. Worm was already dead. And suddenly Chanticleer stood still on his skull, alive. And what was the light that surrounded him, green and glimmering, as passive as the grass? Why, worms. Little worms. An infinity of thread-like worms eating the flesh of the enemy. How long? "What are you?" shrieked Chanticleer, stamping his claw. He touched bone. He had burrowed to bone. "Where are you? Where are you, that I could kill you?" He waved his wings around himself in futility. "Worm? Worm? Worm, is this you?" Chanticleer, panting, slumped to the edge of this continental corpse and looked over to the ground, but there was no answer anywhere. The earth and all its passages were still. "Oh God!" he murmured. He fell. He slithered down Worm's cheek and cracked himself on stone. "Oh, God, don't take this away from me. Not this." John Wesley's eyes were shining. Each new word increased his excitement. "Who?" he said. "Worm," said a goat. "Naw!" said John Wesley Weasel. He beat his paws together. "Naw! Naw!" He could hardly believe his good fortune. "Where?" he said. "There," said String Jack, staring at the hole behind the bush where the stream was swallowed. Indeed, all the animals watched that hole. "Naw!" cried John Wesley. "There?" The hare nodded solemnly. "Rooster, he went down there?" The hare nodded. John grinned. "For fightings with Worm? Worm?" The poor hare nodded. "Naw!" John fairly exploded, grinning till his cheeks split. But there arose from that hole such a shrill, sustained, and distant battle crow that the weasel fell on his back and roared with laughter. Nothings in all the world could ever match this act for glory, and his rooster had conceived it, and his rooster had gone and done it. Hoopla! Who else but his rooster? Nobody else, because no one was like his rooster. "And what's," he cried, "what does Buggers do now?" He grinned like the sun on all of them. Black Pail on a silver field answered, "We wait." "What?" "We wait. Lord Chanticleer chose to go alone. We wait for a dog to come up." "Dog?" said John. He ran to the portal and gazed in. "Mudokani dog?" "Get back," said Black Pail with strange quietness. "We wait." John Wesley looked at him, at all the beasts, and saw that none of them knew his joy. "What the hell?" he thought to himself. "Something's wrong." "But wait," he said. He could do that. His eye lighted on the coyote crouched in an icy corner, and happiness leaped in his heart. "Hey!" he cried. "Hey, Wooden Coyote! John, he got a message for you." The wretched creature didn't so much as lift an eye, so John went straight to him and gave him a happy cuff. "Hey, Wooden Coyote, he's Papa to a little bugger, right?" No answer. No response. "Well, looky, John chatted with that little bugger, and that pup, he says, 'You see my Papa?' says he. 'You tell my Papa.'" John grinned. "Good news. You tell my Papa. Hurry home. Little Benoni Coyote," said John, "he loves his Papa." The coyote heard. The thin coyote began, without emotion, to cry. Well, that was more than a weasel could stand. "What the hell?" he roared, turning to all these taciturn beasts. "What come critters is so sad, so gloomy right now?" It was Black Pail who answered, quietly. "Lord Chanticleer isn't coming back." "What?" said John, eyeing the stag. "He went down below the earth to die." "What? What?" John Wesley rose on his hind legs, a dull cold gripping his chest. "The rooster, he what?" Black Pail whispered it, like a litany. "He's gone to die." Again and again and again, desultory, Chanticleer struck gaff against the stone, making a dead metal sound, while the massive mouth above him laughed no sound at all. It looked as though he were trying to chip a basin in the floor, perhaps to catch some liquid in. Tears, blood, shame. Like hot wax, he allowed the knowledge of his shame to run through him, and still he had no words for it. Worm was dead. What was there left for him to do? He'd sold his whole life for this moment. He'd bought sweet death and an oblivion, but Worm had beaten him to it. So what was left for him to do? He had promised the animals. Oh, Worm! He had sworn an oath before his animals. How grand he had been then! He had committed his worth and all his purpose to this single task, and he had declared it absolutely, in the presence of Pertolote. This is Chanticleer. This is Chanticleer. This is the savior, finally, of the whole world. Oh, glorious cock! But Worm was dead already, and the wretched cock alive. So what, with his miserable life, was there left for him to do? Oh, worm! Oh! Look, look! There's Pertolote, or the shadow of her, oh, my wife, standing in the darkness, shaking her head with a cold, condemning reproach. I asked only that you would not do this thing in madness. Chanticleer started and wailed, Pertolote! Chanticleer bellowed mightily, Oh, hideous! Oh, fire and fury! Oh, worm! He leaped to his feet, trembling. Little worms dropped from him. Little worms had been crawling underneath his feathers. He didn't notice. He turned. He confronted the monumental corpse in its mansion, and he shrieked, Can I pretend that I killed you? No! Chanticleer doubled with the violence of his words. I can't even pretend I did the deed, because look at me! I'm still alive! There was no sacrifice. Will nobody? He cried, and he whirled high into the air, blasted by the winds of his humiliation. He was beginning to understand. Will nobody come and kill me here? It looked like madness, but it was a rooster totally mortified. He flew. He circled thrice in the vault, beating his wings mercilessly, going nowhere. And then suddenly Chanticleer flew with a lancing skill straight for the swelling that had once been Worm's eye. He hit it. He attached himself to it. By rapid slashings he tore the flesh and raked it with his claws and shredded it as though it were a curtain, till the membrane gave way and he tumbled inward, landing in the alcove of Worm's skull where the eyeball had rolled so long ago. Oh, no! There before him lay the last, most painful grief of all. Even his passion turned against him and accused. For here, as though awaiting him, lay the bones of the dog, Mundocani. Bones. Only the bones, great shin bones of a fleeting speed, stilled, ribs that had contained a mortal heart, a head without eyes, a nose. Chanticleer began to pat his wings together, like a child, whining, staring, disbelieving. Mundocani! 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 He whined high in his throat, a child. Couldn't you wait for me? Didn't you know how much I loved you? How can I tell you that I loved you now? Mundocani! Mundocani! Dead, said the air. He died within 3 days, said the air. Didn't you know that? Chanticleer bowed his head. Deep spasms passed through his body as though he would vomit, but he was changing like the chrysalis. He raised his head again, and in that alcove, crawling with worms, he began to pick the individual strings, the worms, from his beloved, one by one. Slowly he cleansed the skeleton, delicately laying each green tendril by. In the light, his eye and his manner all seemed at once serene. I am going to die beside you, dear, he said. No, said the air around him. The air sighed. The air spoke. Who knew whether Chanticleer heard it? For no good, said Chanticleer, now cradling Mundocani's skull. For no good at all, but because I love you, I will stay here till I die. No, you won't, said the air. And because there is nothing left for me, it is as though I am dead already. He rocked the dog. He lifted up his head, his eyes closed. He was mother to these bones. You and I, and no one else, alone, alone in our grave forever, and I will sing for you. Ah, Gaia, you are still the fool, heaved the air of the alcove, the air of the caves, the air in a dry sighing. I am dead indeed, but I am not consumed. What do you know of death? The dog knows more than you do, and I learned from him. I watched him die. I saw the better part of him resolved into the air. Gases, more than gases, he floated out of himself as a spirit. Spirit, Gaia, unconfined by flesh. The very penetration of will and free being. I saw, and I chose that way for myself. Gaia, behold, I have died. I have gone out of myself as spirit. I am the dark. What is the shape of darkness? I am the cold. Where are the limits of coldness? And I may be the penetration into whomsoever does not deny me. Let the living but breathe me in, dear Gaia, and I live. No, you are not alone. I am here. I suffuse the subterranean regions, cold and dark, am everywhere below, waiting. Who knew whether the rooster heard the sighing of the air? He bent in his round closet and kissed the dog's skull. He stroked it lovingly. He too was waiting. He caressed the eye sockets of Mundokani. He whispered, as though it were the conclusion of all things, "Worm is dead." Indeed, Worm is dead. The air blew lightly like a breeze. No body and no name attaches to me any more. I am evil, the thing itself. Breathe, Gaia, sighed the air. Only just breathe and receive me, and I shall abide in you, something of your soul. Oh, Gaia, isn't this a wonder? When you leave this place, then I go with you. You, Gaia, you are my escape, you who set your face against me. And in time, like a spirit, into all the keepers, the very soul of the community, I shall escape you as well. Spiritus mundi, sighed the wind, in a clear, whispering gale, endless as eternity. It really did rush through the tunnels of the earth. It blew throughout the huge room where Chanticleer sat round his bones, protecting them. And then, Ecce! Whistled a mighty wind through the throats of stone. I shall be free! I shall darken the face of God, and all creation shall grow cold. Ecce! Ego facio nova! Only just breathe me, cock. But Chanticleer covered a skull against the wind, and whispered his sorrow and his consolation together. He said, Sweet Mundokani, I love you, and Worm is dead.